Welcome, boys and ghouls, to SL Tonight. I'm Felix Zabezki, your host with the creepiest grin, broadcasting from a haunted corner of Second Life. Tonight, we're tearing into the dark, bloody heart of cold collars, with twisted tales that scared a generation, from the 1940s to today. We're not just talking monsters and gore, though. We're digging into how fearmongers tried to censor these comics into oblivion, and how that fight's still raging with laws like KOSA and UK internet rules all hiding behind protecting kids while choking free speech. Picture me, this dusty retro TV, chills, thrills, and a battle for creative freedom. YouTube crew, hit that like button and buckle up for a screen-worthy ride. I want your thoughts in the comments. What's the scariest comic you've ever read? I grew up on all of these comics. My aunt, she had a collection of Archie comics, and she had a collection of these comics, the Tales from the Crypt, and particularly the Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror ones, which scared the bejesus out of me as a kid. Uh, what's the scariest comic you've ever read? What's censorship doing to art today? Let's crack open this tune. This TV's practically pulsing with the ghosts of old comics. Let's dive into the shadows and see how horror comics were born. Let's take it back to the 1940s when the world was shaking off World War II and comics were exploding. Superheroes were cool, but people wanted something darker, something to match the fear of atom bombs and shadowy enemies. Horror comics stepped into that void, giving readers zombies, ghosts, and things that go bump in the night. Publishers like EC Comics were pioneers, but they weren't alone. EC kicked things off when Bill Gates took over in 1947 after his dad, Max, died. Bill turned wholesome educational comics into entertaining comics, unleashing titles like The Haunt of Fear and crime suspense stories. Stories like Death Stand from Tales from the Crypt number 29 had a hunter facing a ghostly stag that turned the tables. Spooky and poetic, with art by Reed Crandall that made your skin crawl. The EC had company. Atlas Comics, before they became Marvel, dropped adventures into weird worlds with tales of cursed mirrors and living shadows. Ace Comics' web of mystery brought witches and vengeful spirits. These stories tapped into the Cold War paranoia, fear of the unknown, and science gone wrong. What made horror comics special? They didn't just scare, they reflected the world's nightmares. They were raw, unfiltered, like a scream on paper. Artists like Bernie Wrightson and writers like Otto Binder gave these tales a pulse, making every page feel alive. If this TV could light up, it would show those 1940 panels, ghouls, graves, and that eerie glow of fear. Horror comics were free speech at its rawest, but that boldness, it painted a big red target on their backs. YouTube crew, drop in the comments. What's a horror comic or story that gave you chills? Old school like EC or something new? Let's see what haunts you. Here in Second Life, standing by this retro TV, I feel like I'm channeling these comics. SL is all about creating without rules, just like horror comics were, until the censors came knocking. By the early 1950s, horror comics were everywhere. EC Comics led the pack with Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror, but others weren't far behind. Fawcett's World of Fear had stories like The Thing from the Sea, where sailors face a monster that's pure nightmare fuel. Atlas's Menace brought vampires and werewolves that felt real, drawn by Bill Everett with shadows that practically moved. These comics didn't just scare kids, they hooked adults too. With stories about betrayal, revenge, and society's dark side. EC's secret sauce was their mix of horror and heart. Take the October game from Shock Suspense Stories number 9. A dad uses a Halloween game to get revenge on his wife, gently drawn by Jack Kana. It wasn't just gore, it was about human darkness. EC's ghoul host, the Crypt Keeper, Old Witch, added a twisted charm, like they were winking at you from the grave. But the boom brought trouble. By 1953, horror comics were so big that parents and churches started clutching their pearls. And I'm sure you've seen this before. They said these stories were corrupting kids, teaching them to be violent and rebellious. Again, where have we heard this before? Enter Frederick Werthel, a psychologist who hated comics. His 1954 book, Seduction of the Innocent, claimed horror comics caused everything from bad grades to crime. What a dickhead. He pointed to EC's gruesome covers, heads in jars, axes dripping blood, like they were the devil's work. It was a classic moral panic, like blaming rock music and video games today. Imagine this TV flashing those 1950 headlines. Comics corrupt kids. Horror comics were just telling stories, but to some folks, they were public enemy number one. Folks, hit the comments. What's a horror story, comic, movie, anything that got you hooked? Did it ever get you blamed for ruining you? Spill the beans. In Second Life, we create worlds without limits. And that's what horror comics did, until the world decided they were too scary to exist. Things get grim in 1954. Wortham's book sparks a firestorm, and the government holds Senate hearings, dragging comic publishers into the hot seat. The industry panics and creates the Comics Code Authority, a censorship board with rules that sound like they're from a boring dystopia. No blood, no monsters, no horror in titles. Again, does this sound familiar? No challenging authority either. Ex-posts from comic historians say that the code was a direct shot at EC Comics, whose stories were too bold for the buttoned-up 1950s. EC's Bill Gaines didn't go down easy. When the code tried to ban a story about a space traveler facing prejudice, Gaines fought back, calling out their bias. He kept some stories alive, but by 1956 the code killed EC's horror line. Tales from the Crypt, Haunt of Fear, gone. Other publishers suffered too. Atlas toned down Mystic to boring ghost stories. Fawcett ditched horror altogether. The code turned comics into kid-friendly mush, crushing creativity for years. But there's a twist. Gaines pivoted to Mad magazine, which wasn't under the code's rules. Mad kept poking fun at the world, keeping EC's rebellious spark alive. Now look at 2025. Censorship's back with a vengeance. KOSA, the Kids Online Safety Act in the US, and UK's Online Safety Act are sold as protecting kids, just like the Comics Code. KOSA's vague, harmful content rules could force YouTube or X to scrub anything edgy, horror art, spicy posts, even videos like this. UK laws are already cracking down on memes and offensive content. X posts from creators are screaming, "This isn't safety, it's control." It's the Comics Code all over again, trying to sanitize the internet and kill free speech. This TV could have shown those 1954 hearings, a panic dressed up as concern. Today it's KOSA and UK laws trying to make the internet as bland as code-approved comic. We can't let that happen. YouTube, tell me in the comments, does KOSA sound like the Comics Code to you? What kind of art or stories could get censored today? Let's talk. Second Life's My Crypt, and this retro TV's My Altar. Horror comics fought for their voice, and we're fighting the same fight now, because free speech keeps the scares alive. The Comics Code buried horror comics, but they clawed their way back. EC Stories inspired Creepshow in 1982, a love letter to comics by Stephen King and George Romero. The Tales from the Crypt TV show in the 80s and 90s brought EC's Twisted Tales to life, with episodes like Carrie and Death, a killer chased by a vulture in the desert, drawn straight from EC's pages. Modern creators like Junji Ito with Uzumaki Spiral Nightmares and Scott Snyder with Witch's Primal Horror carry EC's torch. The 2024 EC relaunched by Oni Press proves the genre is still kicking. Horror comics showed the world you could scare and say something. They tackled fear, injustice, even war, using monsters to mirror reality. When the Comics Code faded in 2000s, horror roared back. Titles like The Walking Dead and Lock and Key owe everything to those 1950s trailblazers. But censorship's still lurking. KOSA's duty of care could flag horror comics as harmful to kids, just like Wortham did. UK laws are pushing platforms to delete anything edgy. Exposts from artists say that these laws could chill creators, forcing them to self-censor or lose their platform. Video game panics in the 90s, like Mortal Kombat, faced the same protect kids excuse, and we're seeing it again. Free speech is what let horror comics thrive, and it's what let me stand here in Second Life ranting by this retro TV. If we lose it, we lose the stories that make us think, scream, and laugh. His TV's like a window to those old comics, reminding us what's at stake. Horror comics fought censorship once, and we gotta fight it now. For every artist, every voice. YouTube, hit the comments. What's a horror comic, movie, or game you love that censorship might target? How do we keep that free speech alive? I want your thoughts. That's the wild, gory tale of horror comics, from the 1940s rise to the censorship crash and their ended revival. They scared us, challenged us, and fought for free speech against the comic code. Today, KOSA and UK laws are trying to pull the same stunt, but we're not letting them win. Keep telling stories, keep creating, keep fighting for your voice. YouTube, drop in the comments. What's your favorite horror comic and monster? And is KOSA just another comics code? Smash that subscribe button for more SL tonight, and let's keep this crypt rocking. Thanks for joining me, boys and ghouls. Next to my haunted retro TV, this is Felix Zimbeski, signing off from Second Life with a cackle.